help.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Estevez, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, good evening, fellow Martin County residents. My name is Lisa Estevez. I'm the Director of Exceptional Student Education here in Martin County. Tonight, we're going to present to you some of the information that we have for our students with disabilities in our Exceptional Student Education Department. And with that, we have a host of exceptional staff members. You're going to get to meet a few of our staff members that serve our students on a daily basis. And as I said, it's just a few, not a whole bunch. We have a large staff, but tonight it's just a few representing different departments. We hope to have an opportunity to share some information at the end, ask some questions, and we're just going to get started. So welcome and thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. I just want to kind of put up our agenda for tonight and what we'll be taking a look at as we go through this evening. Where we started out, obviously, Lisa started out with a kind of an introduction. Next, we'll be going into a little bit of an overview of the department, which I will do, and then we'll kind of be also following along on the different areas that we have for you tonight. First off, we just wanted to present to you some contact information. We have our director, Lisa Estevez, and then we have two coordinators of exceptional student education, myself and Wilma Amestica Sanchez. And on the screen now is our contact information if you need to contact us by phone with our extensions, as well as our email addresses. So the ESC department in Martin County, it's a group of, highly trained, passionate staff that are here to help students. And the way it's organized is we have, as I've said, the director and the ESC coordinator. And I just kind of want to also share a little bit about some of the other staff members that are involved helping those students. So we have the district program specialists that support schools. We also have behavior professionals that are, trained in specific behavior strategies and help specifically with schools when we have students that require supports in the area of behavior. We also have district school psychologists that work across the district, helping to identify and problem solve and be part of teams on how we can best serve our students in the district. Next, we have, they're called school-based intervention problem-solving coaches. You may have heard them called IPS coaches. And what those are staff at the school that typically run IEP meetings. They make sure that the students' needs at the school are met appropriately. And they're usually your first contact as far as exceptional student education goes at the school. Along with that, we also have at the school, we have a large amount of therapists that help the students in direct service. So we have speech language pathologists, OTs, which is occupational therapists, and physical therapists. We also have some other therapists in the district, such as, if student need vision services, that can help the students as well. Also part of our team at the district is the assistive technology. And those also help with different supports that the students need in the district. And then, you know, last but not least, we have the teachers and support staff, which include paras, you know, to help assist the students. Lisa, did you want to add something as well?
No, I'll take the next slide if you'd like.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
So just a little bit of background information. In Martin County School District, we have approximately 3,000 exceptional students, and they're exceptional to us. So the number of evaluations that we've conducted in the 2019 and 20 year, you can see there is 1,205 evaluations. And currently right now, we have conducted about 1,006. So some students that have been found eligible for services in the 2019-20 school year were approximately 748, and students found eligible for initial ESC services this school year has been 446. We keep track, we're a very data-driven team, and make sure that we keep track of all the information on the students that we have in the district. Next slide. So now I'm going to introduce to you one of our school psychologists, and her name is Susan Mason. And she's going to talk to you a little bit about the evaluation process, which is, I would have to say, one of the areas that we receive the most questions about. So take it over, Susan.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So my name is Susan Mason. I have been a school psychologist. I'm finishing up my 27th year. And evaluation has kind of changed a lot over the years. What is an evaluation? An evaluation is any of the procedures that we have to use in order to determine whether a student has a disability or is gifted. But a big piece is they also are in need of specially designed instruction and related services. And then we have to determine the nature and extent of the exceptional student's education that they need. So it is a very broad evaluation to help drive the supports and services. Our big role is all about child find. That's what we do. We have to figure out who are our students who are disabled. And that's our task. We identify, we locate, and we evaluate them. And that starts from pre-K all the way through high school. It is a huge area. There are 17 areas of potential eligibility for ESC services. That also includes gifted and a 504 accommodation plan, which is going to be reviewed with you tonight. Every single exceptionality has its own evaluation criteria, and that is dictated to us through federal government and then state statutes. And we are required by law to complete all of those components in order to determine eligibility. And we understand sometimes that can be frustrating for teachers, students, parents. Sometimes it's a long process, but it's important that we're identifying students with true disabilities versus perhaps a student who hasn't just had proper education and intervention. Most, but not all require documented intensive interventions. There are a few areas of disability, like a speech impairment or pre-K, that aren't required to have intensive interventions, but almost all of the disabilities do. And that is, again, very, very important to make sure that it's not due to lack of instruction and that they have a true disability. But lastly, the most important piece is that all students must demonstrate a need for special education and services. And what that means is just because a student has autism, it doesn't necessarily mean that they need specially designed instruction. They may be able to be supported perfectly fine within the classroom. So that's why our evaluations are so broad and in depth. Next slide, please. What is a reevaluation? So this is all according to federal law. And the school district must conduct a reevaluation for each child with a disability every 3 years. And that, again, is to make sure that we are providing all of the appropriate supports and services that a student requires. In order to do this, we review all of the existing evaluation data, and then we determine, do we need more data? Often teachers come in, we have all testing results. We know exactly what kind of supports the student needs to continue progressing in the way they are. Sometimes the student may need just something different, and so we may determine to address that in a different way. And again, it's to make sure that reevaluation is to make sure that we are supporting them to the best way that we can. Next slide, please. And here's the big question. What does an evaluation look like? This is so broad. It can be a review of records. It can be a review of all the problem-solving processes, which is the intervention data. Is the student making gains? Is the student learning at a different rate from their peers? And that's what we're doing. We're comparing the students to each other. Are they learning? Some of the evaluations do require what's called direct assessment, and that might be something like an IQ test. It could be academic testing, which would look at maybe reading, writing, math. It could be process testing, looking at working memory, long-term memory, processing speed. It could be a motor test, looking at fine motor, gross motor skills, or speech or language direct assessment. Then there's something that's called indirect assessment. Those could be rating scales that parents complete in terms of behavior. It could be adaptive skills. It could be characteristics consistent with autism. These can be parent, teacher, and self-reports of how that you're viewed. There are observations where we're observing students, maybe time on task, how they relate to peers. Are they able to attend and focus while they're working? And there's also functional behavior assessments to try to determine why is the behavior occurring? Is it to escape or is it to gain attention? Sometimes we're needing a medical recommendation for programs, and that might be for a health impairment, and that's where a doctor becomes involved and helps direct what kind of supports and services a student may require. On occasion, parents have private evaluations, and that may be all that we need in order to determine eligibility for programs. Next. So how do you request an evaluation? Or what do you do if your child's doctor recommends an evaluation, an IEP, or 504? The first thing that you should do is contact your school counselor. Explain your concerns, and they'll help guide you through the process because it is a big process. She'll schedule a meeting to discuss the concerns. We'll look at the intervention data and determine a need for intervention and design that if necessary. If the data supports moving forward with an evaluation, we determine the scope of the evaluation to make sure that we are targeting all of the necessary components for the suspected disability. Once the consent is signed, it must be completed within 60 days. So it's important that we have everything in place before we get that consent signed. And the interventions can run concurrently, so we can do that process in a very efficient manner. If the data does not support moving forward, so the student is really progressing and making adequate progress, we would be required by law to write a letter of refusal to explain that reason why, and then there's processes and procedures if you don't agree with that. Next slide. It was a lot of information in a very short period, so please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any further questions. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you, Susan. I'm going to introduce to you now Amy Yater. She's a program specialist for the ESC department, and one of her areas of expertise is Section 504. So Amy, please.
Thank you, Lisa. Go ahead, next slide. So Section 504 is another program that we facilitate here through our office. And so what is Section 504? So it is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And what it does is it prohibits discrimination of individuals based on their disability. So any discrimination that would be based on their disability. And it requires that the needs of disabled individuals be met as adequately as the needs of their non-disabled counterparts, their peers. Next slide, please. So who is a person with a disability under Section 504? A disability under Section 504 is considered to be either a mental or a physical impairment that substantially limits what they define as a major life activity. Or it can be a record of such an impairment, or information that we treat the student and we regard them as having an impairment. Next slide, please. So what is an impairment under Section 504? This list that you see on the screen is not an exhaustive list, but it is a list of those that we commonly see in the educational setting, but that physical or mental impairment that is identified would have to substantially limit one or more major life activities. So again, you see here walking, some communicating, certainly learning and concentrating. And again, that is not an exhaustive list. Next slide, please. What does substantially limits mean? So under Section 504, substantial limitation is determined by each district based on the nature and the severity of the disabling condition. When we're looking at how limiting a condition is, we do comparisons to individuals who are of the same age, who are not disabled, and we consider those limitations without the lessening effects of any medication, any equipment, any assistive technology, etc. Next slide, please. Who can make a referral? Anyone can refer a student for an evaluation under Section 504. We have referrals that come from team members at school site, concerned relatives, parents. As I said, anyone can refer for Section 504. The key to determining whether a referral needs to be made or taken any further is that we establish that impairment that I discussed before, and we establish a need for any supplemental supports or services. Next slide. So we determine an eligibility by using the federal regulations. We make up a team of individuals that have knowledge and information to share about the child, about the data that is being collected and what that means, particularly in the school environment, and someone on the team who can inform or is knowledgeable about service options and what types of supports could be put in place. Next slide. So for under Section 504 is a little bit different than what Ms. Mason just discussed. Ms. Mason described a process of some formal evaluations. Section 504 does not have that requirement. We are not required to use any formalized assessment. We certainly can, but it's not required. We instead look at a variety of data sources, but I will say that one single source of information or data such as that doctor's report or a doctor's note is not the only piece of information that we consider. Schools must be able to ensure that all of the information that is submitted, is considered in the decision, however. So anything that you present as a parent to the team would be taken under consideration. Next slide, please. So what if the committee and the parents disagree? So of course we strive to come to consensus about the decisions we make in relation to our students. But should there be a disagreement, the parent does have a list of procedural rights that is provided to them. And in those procedural rights, there are processes that the parent can follow to either request a hearing or to file a complaint. But like I said, we certainly do make every attempt to come to consensus before that needs to happen. Next slide. So this is my contact information. Should you have any further questions very specific to maybe your own situation, you can feel free to contact me either at that phone number and extension or email. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. The next section is going to have a combination of what Amy, Ms. Yater, spoke about and what Ms. Mason spoke about a few minutes ago. This section is specifically to address the differences between Section 504 and what we say as IEP, which stands for Individualized Education Plan. Wilma?
Next slide, please. Hi. How's everyone doing? I hope everyone's having a great night. One of the questions we commonly get from parents is, what is the big difference between a 504 plan and an IEP? Ms. Mason did a phenomenal job explaining our school psychologists the process that it takes for us to do an evaluation for Section 504 and an individualized education plan. However, they are two different plans and they look a little different. And we kind of outlined in both boxes, if you can see, and we'll also have this available on the website. So if any parents have any other questions, Section 504, as Ms. Yater explained earlier, is a type of law that falls under the Civil Rights Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And IEP, that Individualized Education Plan, falls under special education law called IDEA, which stands for Individuals with Disabilities Act, which was determined in 2004. The department responsible for overseeing the Section 504 in the United States is the Office of Civil Rights, which is the same office that Ms. Yater explained earlier, where parents can always file any complaint if they had any concerns with a 504 plan or how the process went. And the department responsible for individualized education plans is the Department of Education. Okay, so the requirements. I know that Ms. Yater and Ms. Mason really did a great job in touching upon the difference between both, but just a highlight, for a Section 504, you can be eligible for the protections under it and the procedure safeguards and not have a plan. But if you do have a plan, one of the things that we look at, as Ms. Yater explained, was, does that disability significantly impact the major life function? And what supports do we have to put in place in order for the students to be successful and access that general education curriculum? For the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan, as you can see, we have an ABC. It's a little more complex and the needs that you need for that eligibility. As Ms. Mason said earlier, there are criteria under every exceptionality listed in the federal law of the Individuals with Disabilities Act. So you must meet all the criteria under that specific exceptionality. Not only must you meet that, but the student also, we have to see what specially designed instruction and services that child need in order to access the general education curriculum, and how does it significantly impact the educational performance and access to that curriculum. Under Section 504, there is no age limit for you to have a plan. So for anyone out there that's ever been at any employment location, or there's a business, as long as there's over a certain amount of staff, and if you have a disability and there's something that's limiting your major life function at work, or whether it's at school, whether it's a college or elementary school, middle, high school, you can always request for a 504 evaluation to see if you are eligible for a 504 plan. Now, when we look at an IEP, there is some limitation for the ages. An IEP is offered through the 12th grade, so all the way from pre-K all the way to 12th grade, or until the student is 22 years old in Martin County School District. when it is required. If students still have to work on different skills, such as independent functioning or life skills or employability skills, they may still have that IEP and support until their 22nd birthday. Because it is part of the Department of Education, it's only within the pre-K to 12th grade system. Lastly, one of the major things that we see a lot, and most of the procedural safeguards really surrounds itself for either or plans, is that discipline portion. Under Section 504, there is something called a manifestation determination meeting. If there's a student that is eligible under 504, whether they have a plan or not, and they have an offense at school and they get suspended, in one school year, a student cannot be suspended more than 10 days without a team meeting. And that's a team of individuals that are familiar with the student, that understand the student's data, understand placement, and understand the discipline in terms of the procedural safeguards and understanding the law in terms of manifestation determination meetings. They must sit and look at all of the students' educational background, from academics, behavioral, any psychoeducational evaluations that have ever been conducted for that student, and determine if that incident, that one particular incident, was a manifestation of that child's disability. Depending on that answer or not would depend on what the student serves or not, or what supports we have to put in place for the student to be successful. The same thing is identical for a student that is under IDEA if they have an individualized education plan. One of the major differences only under IDEA and you having that individualized education plan is if a student is required to have a long-term suspension, we are responsible as a school district to ensure that they receive services during that time so that the gap doesn't continue to widen due to their disability. So that is the major difference between the 504 plan and an individualized education plan. Earlier in the slide, we had my information up. If anyone has any question, you can always contact the ESC department and ask for any of the program specialists or coordinators or the director. We can provide more information. Thank you. Everyone have a great night.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ms. Almestica Sanchez. I appreciate that connection between the two. It's really helpful for parents to see a side-by-side comparison so that they'd be able to understand a little bit more about the very complicated world that we live in exceptional student education. So this evening, we were going to have Ms. Patty Crooks, who's our intellectual disabilities program specialist, present. She was going to do it from wherever she was, because she's not in today, but was having technical difficulties. So one of our other program specialists, who's going to present to you again after, is going to review the information for Ms. Crooks's program. And so I'm going to ask Ms. Valerie Hall to please proceed with Ms. Crooks's slides. Thank you.
Absolutely. So hi, my name is Valerie Hall. I'm an ESC program specialist as well, and I oversee the Autism Spectrum Disorder program, but I work very closely with Ms. Crooks. So she's over the intellectual disability program, and basically it's defined as significantly below the intellectual and adaptive functioning as children grow. And I want to say it's a very low incidence in our population, but it's also something that we really have to pay close attention to because they are a very specialized population. And I also want to emphasize that it's not just based on numbers. We look at the student as a whole. The team looks at how they're functioning adaptively, like how they interact at home. Can they, what can they do for themselves? What do they need help with? We look at their social developmental history in addition to their intellectual functioning. Next slide, please. Next slide. I need slide 3. There we go, thank you. So students that qualify for this programming are typically, not always, but typically educated on the access point curriculum. So what that is they are aligned to the general education content. They're delivered at the level that that individual needs for them to be successful and moving forward. So they're built to target the content of general education students, and they're fully aligned to that system, but we can kind of pick and choose what is priority for that student and then modify the level of complexity, how difficult it is, maybe the rate at which they're learning and we're assessing, and how deep we go into that content according to the student's needs. Parent consent is needed every single year to participate in access point curriculum and also the alternate assessment. So our students with intellectual disabilities participate in the state assessment and accountability system, but it's through the Florida Standards alternate assessment, which can be either face-to-face with an adult that's been trained, or it can be through the data folio, which is basically collecting information throughout the year to target those general access points and to see if they have, if they've learned those and they have generalized those skills. And they can demonstrate to us that they have learned those skills. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is what you can expect from students on access points. So the access point instruction will be delivered across access courses. Again, like I said, they mirror all the general education content courses. Students that are identified with this disability they are not always in a separate class setting. They can also participate in general education courses with modifications. They have additional elective options to assist in building like the vocational and transitional skills they'll need as they move out of school into secondary education. Their graduation requirements mirror the general education track. So they do still need a certain amount of credits, a certain GPA, and they have to show mastery on certain statewide assessments. The one thing is that their transcript, for graduation will show that they have a high school diploma, but it will show the access coursework on that transcript. And then those students also have the option to defer getting a standard high school diploma when the IEP identifies the need. Do we need to continue that specialized instruction, or do we need to look at transitional services? So they are eligible to receive services through Martin County School District until their 22nd birthday. And that's something that the team will meet on, reflect on. Parent and any outside agencies are always part of that team. And that's how we go from there. So thank you all for your time. And Ms. Crooks, she said she'd be very willing to answer any questions that anybody has. And she apologizes for the technical difficulties, but in these times, we've all experienced them. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall, for stepping up and helping out Ms. Crooks. Next slide. So the next slide is going to be Ms. Hall again. She's going to talk to you about her area, her specialty area, which is autism. There you go, Val.
Okay, hold on. Let me get out of that. Get up to this. Okay, so my name is Valerie Hall. Next slide, please. I am the program specialist for autism spectrum disorder, Martin County. I do have a background. I'm a behavior analyst, and I have a background in speech pathology, and I was an administrator. And so those skills have given me such an opportunity to look at programming in our county for students with autism through many different eyes. And autism is a word that everybody hears now, but I don't think everybody understands. So autism, long story short, students with autism, people with autism, not just students, all people with autism see their environment through different eyes, through different ways. And there are two different ways to be diagnosed with autism. Well, medical diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder is one thing. And the other one is an educational eligibility for autism. And what that is that it's basically social communication. So how do they interpret language? How do they interpret body language? How do they interpret social interactions in their classrooms? And the expectations of adults across settings. So when I'm in the cafeteria versus when I'm in my classroom or I'm on the bus. So these are all things that can interrupt a child's access to instruction. Next slide, please. So I'm sure many people have heard every year, people that have been diagnosed with autism goes up and up and up and up and up. Right now, 1 in 54 children in the United States are diagnosed with autism. 1 in 34 boys and 1 in 44 girls. And I will tell you that because girls diagnosed with autism, their behaviors are very different than boys that have been diagnosed with autism. And that is something that is becoming more to the field, to the eye openings of educators, because when you think autism, you think all of the stereotypical things, nonverbal, stereotypical behaviors, not making eye contact, or it can look very different according to that whole spectrum that autism truly is. There are no specific ethnic or socioeconomic groups that it affects. It's really how we approach a student and really look at them as a whole and how they're looking at their environment. Next slide, please. So currently in Martin County, we serve 350 students that have the educational eligibility of autism spectrum disorder. And I will say this, we have many more students that have a medical diagnosis that do not need, as Ms. Mason said, they do not need that specialized instruction. We might need to help them with some social emotional learning or something like that. And that's why we have 3 types of classroom settings. We have general education. We have resource where they have some of their classes with general education students and some with students that have a disability. And then we have a separate class setting where the majority of their day is spent with students that have a disability. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to read all of this to you, but here are what all students with disabilities, it doesn't matter if it's autism or anything else, every student has all these things available to them in the general education classroom. We as ESC department support students to be in their least restrictive environment, which means the least amount of adult support with what we can give them to be independent learners and grow as a student who does not rely on adults to help them get through school. So we can do things like visual checklists, behavioral supports, social stories. We can set up supports for parents. We can collaborate with outside therapists. We can have counseling services and transition services for students. That is available to any student that is identified as a student with a disability. Next slide, please. A separate class setting, these are students that need direct specialized instructions and skills required for active engagement and active responding across the entire day. So these are classrooms that are highly structured. They are set up physically to use the classroom so that the student has reduced distractions, that they have the availability of visual supports that they need. We have token economies to encourage self-regulation and coping skills, because a lot of times people think school, you teach academics. Specifically with students on the spectrum, we have to directly teach coping skills, directly teach social skills. You cannot ask a student that has autism to go to the playground and learn how to play. We, as trained staff, set up activities for that student where they have to ask to play, or they need another puzzle piece because they don't have it and they have to ask for it. So it's very deliberate teaching as far as social skills, self-regulation. We have safe spaces for them to calm. It's just a place where you go and there's no academic demand. We have things in that area, depending on the student. Maybe they need a certain kind of stuffed animal or a texture or a smell, or they need a certain kind of just like a darker day or something just to calm them down. And then also teaches self-regulation. And when they're ready to come back, then they're ready for instruction. No harm, no foul. Everybody's ready to go back. There's no punishment for it. There's no repercussions for it. It's teaching that self-regulation and that self-monitoring skill. We also use applied behavior analysis principles. Again, I said I am a behavior analyst, to shape and reinforce those behaviors. Just long story short, ABA teaches based on function. And all of us, adults, everyone, we do the easiest thing to get what we need. And so problem behaviors are not because they're trying to be a problem. It's the easiest way that they get what they need at that time. So our job is, as professionals, is to teach them how to get what they need in the most appropriate way. Next. There's all my contact information, and I'd be happy to reach out to anyone. I have many different outside resources as well as CARD, Agency for Persons with Disabilities. So anything that you have any questions for, please don't hesitate to call, reach out to me. Be more than happy to speak with you. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Really appreciate that in-depth look into the very, very complicated worlds of autism. So I believe this is last, but I'm going to say definitely not least. Very proud of all the work that's going on in this department with our program specialist, and her name is Kim Thorne, and she is a transition specialist, a little different than a program specialist. So I'm going to let Kim take it away and talk to you a few minutes about what she does and what she does really well. Kim?
Thank you, Lisa. As Ms. Estevez said, I'm Kim Thorne. I'm the transition specialist for the Martin County School District. And a lot of times when parents hear transition, we know of transition as when our students go from pre-K to kindergarten, 5th to 6th grade, elementary to middle, or middle to high. Tonight, I want to speak specifically on secondary transition because there's a lot of new statutes coming down in legislation about when we start working with our young adults or young teens on planning for their future. And I can tell you at 14, none of us know what we want to do when we grow up. So, but when a student turns 14 in the state of Florida, actually across the country, we are to start working with our students on what they want to do post-high school. And from 14 and 15, at those IEP years, your students are invited to attend and encouraged to attend their IEP meetings. We talk about different agencies and supports that can be put in place so that they get employability skills outside of the school district. They are also taking courses in school on employability and career choices. Our students are also 14 and 15 years old talking about what their plans for high school are. What kind of coursework do they want to take in high school? Are they interested in career and technical coursework? And then in high school, we're working with them as they're 15, turning 16 and older on filling out career interest surveys and in capturing what they want to do post-high school in their IEP. That is that transition component of the IEP. We're working on improving the academic achievement and functional achievement of the student with a disability. And this is for all students with disabilities. There's a lot of misconception about that this information is only for students with the more significant cognitive developmental disabilities. But however, there is a lot out there in our area to support all students with disabilities in their post-secondary goals. And it's not just those that are going to go work at an entry-level position, but all the way up going to finding the correct college fit for our students. A lot of help out there. Next slide, please. I think what Ms. Estevez was referring to that we've really been working hard on as a district this year is bringing back to our Project Search transition program, which that program is for students who are 18 to 22, and you've heard a lot about students staying until they're 22 or their 22nd birthday. And we've been developing programs to help our students once they meet graduation requirements. During their senior year, the IEP team talks about, does the student need to defer receipt of their diploma in order to meet their post-secondary goals, whatever those goals may be. For a lot of our students with cognitive or significant developmental delays, there's not a lot of sitting on a high school campus that's going to allow them to do anything different than what they've been doing. So for several years, we had a Project Search program, and for the last couple of years, it has been put on hold due to lack of interest, and now we are excited that we're bringing it back to the Martin County School District. We are starting the Project Search with the host business, Martin County School District, where our students who apply are immersed in a total work setting here at the school district office. We're also beginning a new program called Martin Sales, and that stands for Students Acquiring Independent Living Skills. It's exceptional student education. We have to have an acronym. So with that being said, it's another transition program for students who have deferred for the reasons of employability, independent living skills. Next slide, please. So when you ask, what is the difference? Here is the difference. Project Search is a total immersion in the work setting all day long, except for an hour and a half of the school day. Students are working 6 to 6.5 hours a day. The student does need to be 18 to 21. They cannot be turning 22, but you're thinking, oh, well, we just heard our student can go till their 22nd birthday. This Project Search is also supported by vocational rehabilitation, and it is their rules that we're partnership with them that in order to provide those youth services, the student cannot turn 22 while in Project Search. But the good thing about that is at the conclusion of the Project Search, which is a one-year program, the students are assisted with finding employment in the community. With Martin Sales, it is not a one-year program, and students can stay until their 22nd birthday. It is also housed off of a high school campus. It's going to be housed at the Hope Center. Many of our parents are familiar with the Hope Center for Autism. They're graciously giving us classroom space there. And our students are going to be going out to work 3 to 4 hours a day, 2 to 3 days a week, depending on the abilities and levels of our students, very individual based. The hopes is that once students leave the high school setting and come to Martin Sales, we get them the school skills they need, the communication skills, the social emotional skills that they need in order to become employed. And some of our students will stay a year in Martin Sales and then go on to Project Search. Some of our students may stay 2 years at Martin Sales and go on to be employed. So we're very excited about these programs. Next slide, please. It's a lot of information, and I could talk to you about transition for the whole hour. As my husband says, I have the gift of gab. So please reach out to me. There's a lot of agencies, as Ms. Hall said. There's FAU CARD. There's agencies for persons with disabilities. There's vocational rehabilitation. You know, I'd love to speak to you with your young adult, young teen about transition. My contact information is there.
Thank you, Ms. Thorne. Okay, so I made a mistake. I thought that the last program to be discussed was going to be transition. The last program that we have to talk a few minutes about is our emotional behavioral disorder program, this program is led by Ms. Charlene Campbell. And I'm going to let Charlene have an opportunity to share some of the things she does in her program. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Charlene Campbell. I am the EBD program specialist. So I service students with emotional behavioral disorder. Next slide. So a student with an emotional behavioral disorder will exhibit one or more of the following characteristics with sufficient duration, frequency, and intensity to the degree to which you've heard many times tonight rises to the level of specially designed instruction. So the student may have difficulty with interpersonal relationships, difficult learning that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors, inappropriate behavior or feelings under normal circumstances. They may display mood disorder and or depression, develop physical symptoms, pain, or unreasonable fears with personal or school problems. These students are students with very underdeveloped social skills and emotional regulation skills. Next slide, please. Educating a student with an emotional behavior disorder. So we look at all the different settings we have in Martin County for students with this disorder. So a student who's served in the general education class, we infuse the social skill, instruction, self-regulation skill into their daily activities. And they may participate in one of our check-in, check-out programs or get pulled out for counseling or get direct social skills lesson. This is the least restrictive environment. Then we have a separate class placement. If a student is in need of a more structured, smaller class environment, they may be placed in a varying exceptionality unit structured to meet their needs. This is a more restrictive environment where they would receive direct social skill instruction. They have a behavior management system with very clear expectations in that classroom. So, and in Martin County, we use one called In the Game, similar to like point and level systems, if anybody has used those before. And these students, most of them would have a individualized behavior intervention plan. And as Ms. Hall talked about was the applied behavior analysis. So the plan is for teachers to use. They utilize that to teach the students appropriate replacement behaviors to meet the function of the behavior. And behavior is typically a form of communication for those students. So if the students' needs are not sustainable on a comprehensive campus, we would look at a separate school. For elementary and middle. Right now, we do have Willoughby Learning Center. And this is where a student can have access to things such as crisis counseling, med management, immediate intervention, direct specialized instruction for all learning. This is a very restrictive environment. Next slide. So obviously the goal for our EBD program is we really want them to acquire the appropriate behaviors and what I call school survival skills to keep them in that least restrictive environment in school and to graduate high school. So this is, we want to facilitate the behavior change by teaching replacement behaviors to help support new developmental trajectory and allow students to get their needs met in the appropriate way. So to support the emotional development that leads to effective navigation across all settings for life success. Next slide. This is my contact information. As we all had said, if you need any further information, please reach out to me. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here and spending time with us this evening. Thank you to this awesome, illustrious staff that we have in the ESC department with years and years of expertise in their area, and actually even expertise in other areas, as you've heard some people tell a little bit about their background. If you need more information, we do have an ESC website that we're constantly trying to update and make sure that it has up-to-date information. As Ms. Sanchez said, we'll be putting some of the slides on the website with some pertinent information. The other thing that I just like to say is that feel free at any time to reach out to our ESC department to have specific questions answered relative to your child or someone that you know. If we don't know the answer, I can pretty much guarantee you we are going to find a way to get the answer to you. And sometimes you may call. We're extremely, extremely busy. We may not get to you right away the minute that you think that you need an answer done. Give us about 24 hours, and we should be able to answer any question that you may have. And so I just guess we can, do we open it up to question and answer? This is our first parent university that we've attended. We hope to do more in the future, and maybe some more that's more specific to areas that parents really are looking for. But we kind of feel that not everybody knows what a large department that we have and everything that we're responsible for and how we're responsible for the students in Martin County School District. So I just want to say thank you for attending. And I think there was a question in the question and answer box.
There is.
Yes.
Oh, that's a long one.
That's why I'm not going to read it. I'll let you take it.
Well, wait a second. Okay, so this one might require a little bit more thought. We have someone who's asking if it would be best for all students to mix in a classroom, whether they are of like ESC classification or not. And would students benefit in the setting at all, or those students who are below level be frustrated paired with students who are gifted and vice versa? Are there any findings and or research to support mental acuity in students so that they may learn more from those who are gifted? I'm trying to understand if students who are below level may learn through their peers who are gifted. Wow, a loaded question. There's so many components to that question that it would really have to be broken down. And one of the things I would say is if this parent would like to, or this person would like to reach out to the department to speak more about it. But what I would say about that is when you're asking about research, you can find research, I'm sure, for either end of that question. That some people would substantiate that absolutely. It is really good for kids to be in a classroom with like learners. But then you have the other side of that I'm sure you will find that they say, well, sometimes if you're in a situation where you're with learners who are at higher levels, then they're going to push that other person to the next level. So I'd have to say that the way the classrooms are structured in Martin County School District, we do what's called, in the ESC department, we tout this term called differentiated instruction. And what we do is we want to make sure that we reach the level of all students in the classroom by differentiating and meeting the needs of different learning styles and students that are at different levels, because there's no way that you're going to have this pure class where everybody, even within gifted students, you have levels of giftedness. So if there's anybody else that wanted to just like add a few things about that and something maybe that I didn't hit on, and please feel free to jump in, or let's have another conversation about that, because it's an excellent question, but there's a lot of different schools of thought in making a response to that. No one else?
Lisa, Ms. Estevez, I'll be happy to chime in just from my experience before coming to this role at the district. I know that a lot of our students, when we're looking at scheduling classes, it is a huge mixture of students in those general education classes, students with disabilities, as well as students who, I'm going to say average for lack of a better word, off the cuff like this, and your higher achievers, your gifted students, and just so that, you know, the students that might need that extra support or boost, or just that high level peer modeling for them. So we do that in the district from my knowledge. You know, when we're looking at those students who are self-contained, it's because their needs could not be met in that general education setting. And I know a lot of our schools have the gifted peer helpers sometimes working in those classrooms.
And, you know, I know we don't have much time left, but I would like to chime in just by saying that it really has to do with how the classroom is structured and how the learning is taking place, because every student has something to offer their peers. And it's about structuring that classroom so that every child has a time to shine during the day. And so it's not about, you know, like the question was, like minded acuity. It's really about learning curiosity and methods of how students learn and how the adults are in tune with that and how they structure the classroom.
Thank you. And there's no other questions, right, Mr. Hall?
Nope, that's the only one.
Okay.
So I've captured that question and I will send it to you and you can have that available for chewing on. If that parent would like to call in, they'll have that question available and have given it some thought.
Yeah, well, loaded quite there's lots of information that can be shared about that. So, but thank you so much, everyone. And I want to especially say thank you to the staff who have dedicated so much time to the most neediest students in the district, and most of them have dedicated their entire careers in education to our special needs students. And so thank you so much for taking your time and spending it with us this evening. And we hope that in the future we can answer any other further questions that you may have. Have a good night. Chris, do we know how many participants there were?
Yeah, I'll give you all that information.
Okay, we wait for people to sign off.
You can go ahead and sign off now.
You want me to leave?
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, but no.